So, over to you, Taylor, our esteemed host for the day.
Awesome. So, I guess we can kick this off for, it's kind of an open discussion, but so this is Austin Software Cooperatives, and it's a monthly meetup. We've been running it for nearly 5 years, and we do, as Watson was going over, we do book reviews, white papers. We've had open discussions. Susan, you were on with us, what was it, maybe 2 years ago? Something like that. And we dove in and had kind of an open discussion at that time over a few topics on vulnerability and other things, which was really great. And sometimes we dive in very deeply to something. Sometimes we're covering many topics. Last month we did a book review of Better Work Together, and there's a paper, a mind map that Watson did where it goes deeply into a lot of the chapters and highlights a lot of the points. And there's definitely areas that we want to dive further in. We plan on doing that kind of internally and picking a few that we want to focus on. And we thought maybe as a bridge to that, getting whoever was available as far as co-authors of the book would be a good way to move forward, and then maybe get feedback from the rest of the community on what other people would be interested in. And maybe that'll be an upcoming topic where we focus in on maybe one thing, or hear about upcoming, maybe where things are going as from this book. So so we have, is it 3 of the co-authors, I believe, on the call right now?
And I can do a screen share of the mind map too, if you like, Taylor.
Sure, I can turn that over to you. This real quick, what Lucina just posted is the slide deck, and this is going over the agenda from last month where we dove into the mind map. I won't click this. I'll let you do that, Watson, so you can move around a lot easier. But we can, if you'd like, Susan, we can kind of do a quick run through of what we talked about last time. So folks can maybe later offline go, and if they'd like to review the whole thing, it goes in a lot more depth. But we could start there. But otherwise, what I'd like to do is make sure and give time for the co-authors that are with us to talk about the topics they were really passionate about in the book, and we can maybe dive into those, give a little time for each. So Susan, would you like an overview, or how would you like to do this as far as moving forward?
I think that I'm curious about how many people on this call were not at the previous call. I know that myself, Alana, and Joshua have watched the video and have done a bit of a dive into the mind map ourselves, but it could be interesting just for the people that weren't around last time, maybe for you to very quickly take everybody through your key questions and key areas for further investigation.
Okay, great. Watson, I'll stop my sharing here, and then you should be able to do a screen share, and we can click that and follow. It's all yours, Watson.
Is this working?
I guess one more item just to let everyone know on the call. All of the meetups that we do are published to YouTube. So everything right now is being recorded. Should have said this earlier, but if there's any issues, we're going to be publishing this after. Since it's Zoom, it'll take a little bit more time, but we'll publish this to YouTube. So the rest of the call is also recorded. Okay, Watson.
Sure. Can you guys see the screen, or? I think you can.
I'm okay.
All right. This mind map, it's basically has a breakdown of the different essays. So we have essay one. Essay one is the more people working on stuff that matters. You got evolving Enspiral, radically good livelihood, saying yes to purpose, and when community is a business. One of the reoccurring themes that we brought in-house into Volk and had a discussion on was the concept or the idea of a purpose, and trying to hash that out internally and trying to get alignment between your purpose with your morals, and trying to do something that matters, like the first essay says. And so that's a thing that we're very interested in. I'm also very interested in this coffee, beer, pizza, how the I guess the financial and incentive system was created and reasoned about. So I'm just excited to hear about some of that. I don't know if anyone else from the last meeting has questions that they wanted to put forward.
So myself, Alana, and Joshua are the authors of essays 1, 2, 3 in order. However, I think that we all do have a good grasp of the rest of the content and can speak to any specific needs that you have. I'm just wondering if it would make sense, maybe just going in order. Joshua, maybe you could spend a few minutes just talking about your approach to the chapter, what was important to you, and maybe how this big question of purpose loops into how you chose to write and what you chose to write about.
I wrote what I was told about. It was like, hey, Josh, you do this bit, I think was the short version of it. I'd say that one of the biggest things that worked for me with purpose was that everyone's got their own and everyone's got a different one. And it's not about finding one purpose or the purpose, which is better than all of them or that kind of thing. But it's more just saying that, hey, purpose is important. And it's not just what we're doing or why we're doing it, but it's kind of like, what's the impact or the results of our work that is really important. And it's and a lot of the times those thoughts get bundled in around purpose. And I found that the experience of showing up to people and saying, hey, the mission of Enspiral is to help you do work you love with people you love on biggest issues of our time while getting paid well, was it's a way of talking about lots of things, and purpose is just one part of it. I think as important as the other parts of it, it's about working with people that you really like and respect, and it's about doing work that you really enjoy, and it's about making it work financially. And it's all of those three things together which make it work for me. If anyone was missing, it wouldn't feel whole. So I'd say purpose is a component, and maybe it's a pivotal one or a foundational one, but there's a couple other ones alongside of it.
Any specific questions for Joshua on his chapter?
I'm always interested when someone puts forward the premise that questions, creating the right question is the right thing to do. and I saw some of that in this chapter, and I know maybe rehash some of that if you could. But what were the real questions, the most impactful questions that you found?
I think meant a little bit on the screen so that the text is a little larger. Thanks.
So I found a lot of that stuff around questions, not solutions. It's more of an antidote to solutioneering, which I think a lot of people, particularly engineering mindset people, they hear a problem and then they just start thinking about multiple solutions to it. Entrepreneurs do it as well, where most entrepreneurs are making up business ideas in their heads every other day, and that's like the skill of entrepreneuring. And I think that one of the disciplines of doing that well is to focus on trying to solve the right things. And that one way to do that is to focus on what's the question we're asking here, or why is this question important, or is it the right question, as opposed to how do I make a better light bulb, or whatever the solutions tend to go towards. So I'd say and this is, I'd say, a theme which has worked pretty well for me over the years is, hey, let's focus on the questions and let's focus on getting the right question, because as soon as you frame the question in the right way, often the answer can emerge as well. And it's so that would be one part of it. I think the other part of it is about realizing that what we need to be truly creative or original or whatnot is like a paradigm shift or a mindset change. And that whole thing of I forget the quote, but it's along the lines of the mindset that created the problem can't be the mindset that fixes it. And that you actually need a different way of seeing things and a way of understanding things to fix some of the intrinsic problems that we face around. So that would be the other part of it for me. And so the other thing would be that the question is always different, and it always depends on the people and the context, and it's less about what the question is, and it's more about putting the focus on the question and getting people to put their time and attention on it.
It sounds great. As far as the culture of experimentation, talk a little bit about that. As far as maybe, how is it that you get people to experiment and kind of, I don't know, have the patience to stick to it? And when it seems like people want, when they come together and they want to start a business or they want to do some type of venture, it seems like they want like an easy or quick fix, or they're coming from, I guess the world tells them that businesses should work in a certain way. There should be a strong vision that doesn't change, kind of thing. And when you talk about doing the experimentation and coming and evolving the company, or I guess the foundation, it seems like there was, I would like to hear about how the response was as you went through these different phases.
It might be good to throw to Alana for some of this as well, because I would say that one, I think it's that whole thing about some part of the story or the narrative or the purpose or the vision which doesn't change and is immutable is absolutely important. Otherwise, there's no consistency or coherence over time. And for me, that more people working on stuff that matters, that has provided a level of coherence no matter what else changes. And so I think that's really important. But also, I'd say one of the things I observed when talking about this culture of experimentation or doing it and doing lots of things is that I think there's a lot of novelty addiction and a lot of distraction where people like things when they're new. And as soon as they get old or not as novel, then people's energy wanes. And that's where I found lots of Alana's work around the full circle leadership and saying, hey, actually, it's what happens after the novelty phase, which is more important. Otherwise, you don't get any results of things. And so I would say that if there was I might have been the novelty addict, and Alana might have taken a stand for turning novelty into things that are valuable. And it was a balance of those two things, particularly in the early days, which really made stuff work.
Could we hear from Alana then a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that speaks a lot to what I talked about in the second chapter as well. I guess when I sat down to write that chapter, like, what happened is I kind of focused on the stuff that I'm most interested in. And to me, that's the very practical, hands-on, what happened, not the necessarily the bigger kind of, I don't know, philosophy or vision stuff. Because, yeah, Joshua and I had a really great kind of complementary relationship in that way, that like the things that we were excited about complemented each other. I don't tend to start things from scratch. I tend to come in when something's possibly like nebulous, but people are starting to get excited, and then figuring out how do we make this real and start to build it and sustain it. Those are the things that get me excited. So that is kind of what I talked about in our chapter, was just the story of how that worked on a practical level in the early days, the challenges that we ran into. I mean, we made lots of mistakes along the way, but definitely felt like I was kind of hitting that drumbeat of, yeah, cool, you're excited about this stuff, but what about this other stuff we started building, and like how cool the foundation could that be to get even further if we really implemented things or saw it through. I think that, yeah, man, it's just, there were so many, there still are probably, there's so many strong natural filters. Like, if you were there to make money, there's no way in hell you'd go about business the way that we were doing it. If you are there to, you know, do anything except this very specific combo of cooperative ways of working, business, social impact, sprinkled with technology. Yeah. So if you weren't really on board with that, you just wouldn't end up staying, because it was hard. Like, it was hard. There was no money. There was, you know, so many things to figure out. And the people who stuck around were the people who just really shared these core values. And I think the cool thing about it was you could apply those core values to so many different projects and missions and ways of working and everything, that allowed there to be that diversity, while still, as you say, as Joshua said, that core underneath it all of more people working on stuff that matters did stick. And it didn't stick because we were like lashing it to the boat. It stuck because it was working and it was true. It was like deep in the DNA. I don't think it's possible in a network like that to force something that isn't essentially true and genuine to stick over time. I think it's more a process of observing and understanding, letting the emergent reality teach you what those essential things are, and then, you know, figuring out, okay, how do we kind of highlight them or better understand them or help other people engage with them. But if something doesn't want to be, I think I talked about that in my chapter as well, just because I've, you know, tried that unsuccessfully so many times, trying to be like, no, I'm sure like this should work. Why aren't people doing it? That's that signal that, okay, no, you can't leverage people against their will. There's no telling people what to do. You just have to find the things that actually align the incentives and the interest and the energy and the vision and the practicalities. And then those are the things that will stick and you can build on them. That was like a really kind of wide-ranging answer. I'm not sure if I answered the question very directly.
That pattern for joining tie in a lot with what you're talking about there, where it started. It sounds like a lot of it may have been intuitive on the people that had the different mixture that seemed to match, and then starting to notice those patterns, so that you're pulling in the right people that have those same mixture and needs, purpose, everything else.
Yeah, I think towards the very beginning, it was definitely a case of the people who were already the closest match, sort of finding us and sticking around. And that was, you know, in the very beginning, it was mainly programmers and designers, people working close to technology. And then there was a very conscious process starting pretty early on, to diversify in terms of the different kinds of people who could find it accessible or interesting, and also, you know, the different kinds of projects and perspectives that they could bring. But it was always a very tricky balance, because by definition, that sort of bootstrapping kind of, I don't know, make it up as you go along, build the plane as the plane is flying approach is tough and not accessible to people who have certain kinds of limitations financially or on their time, or they have other responsibilities, or they need a level of stability. So in the early days, that was a strong filter. And then we just started very slowly doing experiments in the space of like, well, what if we did an internship program, a programming internship program, or a social enterprise internship program. And, most of those were done very much building the plane as the plane was flying, and we didn't know what we were really doing. We didn't really have funding, but we felt our way through, and that definitely had an impact on more people coming in. But even as that started to diversify, and we had lawyers and accountants and other sorts of people with different skills coming in, there still was that core of like, if you weren't like deeply on board with the business plus social impact plus cooperative way of working, like it would just be like, there are parts of working that way that are just hugely challenging and annoying and take forever, and unless you're like truly on board with those values, you would definitely be like, nah, fuck this, I'm gonna go get a job where I get paid 5 times as much and somebody tells me what to do and why we're here, and I don't have to figure all this out for myself. So yeah, it continued to have natural filters.
So I'm interested in how, these companies founded, I think, is part of what you were just talking about, different as it spreads out. And one thing that I'm interested in from experience in Volk, as well as I ran a freelance collective before this cooperative, and one of the challenges that I saw before and we've had to deal with is how to make the risk that you're taking as for bootstrapping something like this. How do you make that visible to people that they don't already have that experience? If you've been freelancing on your own, then you may have already had some of that experience. If you're an entrepreneur and had a startup, you have some. There's a difference between being a freelancer by yourself and a freelancer that works with several partners. There's a difference whenever I started having a collective, and it's this network where you're taking on larger and larger projects, and a major difference with a cooperative, which in my mind, you have a little bit of the startup and all the stuff going there. You have the freelance stuff. You have remote, which may be free. You can have freelancers local, and then potentially distributed, and we're distributed. So when you mix all of that, trying to communicate that and get people to understand and see what is the relative risk is tough. And then as to go on that, to be more specific, you like the law firm and these traditional software shops, all the different pieces, those would be saying, we built structures to account for the risks these people are going to take so that you could actually pull those people in. But I'm interested in, like, how did you make it visible? Because it's been difficult to communicate the different aspects when you're on board, getting people to join, and then as Susan said, getting people to stay.
Yeah, that I've been on a learning journey about those questions myself, so I'm not sure I have all the answers, but I can tell you some things that I've thought about along the way. Like risk, like how to account for risk is like a core principle for all startups. And there is a lot out there in traditional startup land where oftentimes it's closely tied to capital structure, and the capital takes the risk, and sort of the entrepreneurs take some of the risk, but they're also getting paid from the investment and stuff like that. And then therefore kind of control is also balanced based on perceived risk taking and stuff like that. A lot of times that's badly out of balance, and entrepreneurs get chewed up and spit out a lot. But I think what I'm trying to say is the underlying principles I don't think are entirely different for a social impact focused, cooperatively owned venture. You still have the same questions about, okay, what is the nature of the risk? Who is taking what risks? How is that sort of accounted for in how we're distributing resources? And I'm talking about money, but also time and all kinds of other resources. yeah, so I think it's that careful balancing act, which is true for all startups, to get that balance right. And I think there's, I recently read an article called something like Diary of a Risk-Averse Entrepreneur or something like that, because I am not naturally a big risk-taking sort of a person, or I guess I don't think of myself that way. The only reason I was able to get into startups was because we were doing them cooperatively. Like, it makes such a huge difference to me, like, to sit down with a group of people who I know and trust, and who know and trust me, and discuss the situation and make a decision together. I can take so much bigger risks that way than if it were all on me, or I was doing it just by myself. Like, there's just no way I would have become an entrepreneur, full stop. So I think, like, the risk is bigger in some ways. Like, if you're doing that thing, which I have done many times, and many of you probably doing, where you're trying to create not only a new product, but also a totally new structure and a new market that you're trying to forge out of nothing for this product, and just new capital, structures. And if you're trying to reinvent it all at once, like, it's so incredibly hard. And yeah, there's serious risk there. So I think being really explicit about that and talking about it a lot, talking about risk in a very broad way, like, okay, we've got all kinds of risks here. We've got money risk, we've got time risk, we've got opportunity cost risk, we've got, like, health risks. Are we working ourselves too hard? Like, we've got, so taking a holistic view of risk and then just talking about, I think a lot of people just think about it in terms of, okay, well, who's going to get paid if this thing is successful? That is one big part of the conversation, but I think it's so much broader than that.
I'd like to hear Joshua's take on that, and then it looked like Columbian had a question as well.
I'd say that everyone sees risk in different ways, and everyone's got different levels of tolerance. And to me, this is about, like, plurality, and in a network is that you want everyone to be comfortable, and you want to have opportunities for everyone to sort of go to have their needs met. And that idea, like, one of the explicit purposes of an entrepreneurial cooperative was to say, hey, it's easy to do businesses together. They'll be more successful. We'll have a better time of it. And for me, some of the Enspiral's biggest successes has been, I'd probably say it's Optimi, which is a bunch of people who showed up and never thought about starting a business, started doing contracting, helping administration in the different businesses. Then sort of got nudged into, hey, if you could serve more people in the network if you had your own business for this. So they form a 3-person cooperative, and they go on this journey of entrepreneurship, which was nothing they ever set themselves up to do. But now they're learning the skills of business, running a sort of 3-person services cooperative. And I think it's the idea that actually there's nothing magic about entrepreneurship. It's just a skill like anything else. And that if you sort of make it so that you can mitigate the risks, and that you can let people take the amount of risk that they're comfortable with, it's about having fluidity in that rather than all or nothing, like, hey, bet the house or have a day job. One of the things I think about with risk is around, like, rock climbing and 3 points of contact. If you can start to say, actually, cool, if someone's health is in a good state and their financial situation's in a good state, and so on, then maybe they can take a bigger punt on lack of certainty in their job situation. And often a lot of the journey of the network was lots of freelancers and services people showing up, and then they start to build up a bit of capital or a bit of time, and then they leave the service side of things and start wanting to do products. So the biggest challenge we had was trying to keep people in the services parts of the business, because not many people were really enthused about staying there, and which was part of our journey over time.
Just to add to that, like, we tried a bunch of all kinds of things about accounting for who was working on this thing, and, like, we had fairy gold, and there were Lumio points, and there were, like, various kinds of cooperative sweat equity or whatever. None of those, like, really, I mean, maybe I'm still hoping I can get paid on my Lumio points someday, because it's still going to be amazing and successful, right? It is. I don't think any of those ended up being, like, so many people out there are like, what we need to do is build a system that just quantifies everything everyone's contributing, and then we'll use blockchain to pay people. I don't know. I hear a lot of cryptocurrency bros talking about stuff like that, and I'm just like, yo, it's the stuff that you can't count where the value is. The value of a commons comes from indirect reciprocity. It comes from putting in without knowing exactly what you're going to get back, And that's the dynamic that allows it to be bigger than some of those parts and actually hugely more wealth creating than anything that's quantifiable. So like, I don't know, I didn't make that much money, I guess, when I was at Enspiral. I got by, it was great, it was fine, but like the richness and wealth and the networks that I have now and the like amazing relationships and the knowledge I gained and the skills I gained, like uncountable with fairy gold or money or anything like that. And I don't know why I felt fine I just kept throwing things into the middle. I didn't exactly know what was going to happen, but I just felt like it was going to more than pay off, and it absolutely did in many, many ways. So it's hard, and I think it's even harder in America. Like, it's a really different environment if you have to hustle or you are going to be kicked out of your house or you can't get healthcare. And like, we don't have that problem in New Zealand. In New Zealand, there's only so far you can fall. So it might be different in different environments, but I do think that amount of trust where you can just give and then be given back to it is part of the equation.
Cool. Colombian, did you want to ask your question?
Hi, we're in a public place and we have a few technologies, so hopefully this works. Can you hear me?
Sounds good.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I'm in Los Angeles, and this is sort of a Tech Workers Coalition meeting. One of their guys here, Perry. But I've been really inspired by Enspiral and following your work. I think I actually contacted Richard Bartlett and was sort of asking him about the idea of how you start something from nothing. So Alana was saying she jumps in when it's kind of nebulous, and I guess I've been used to that. I do user experience, and I've often been on a job when it's kind of beginning and nebulous, but everyone's paid to be there and they're all there. So this idea of starting a whole new venture when the money's uncertain and people don't even understand this new kind of structure, and it is America, it's Los Angeles, no one could really not be making having a paid job. So I guess there's a lot of challenges. I don't feel as bad listening to the challenges you have even once it's going, but I guess I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on that, or even the idea of making a network to sort of help people, or if Enspiral is a network like that, or basically any ideas of like individuals throughout America, which is very large and you need to be making money, how they could start to work in these ways, either in their own jobs or any advice I'd love to hear.
So a couple of thoughts from me. One would be around there needs to be a powerful story or invitation at the beginning, because you're right, there's lots of inertia, there's lots of why would I do something like this, and there needs to be a possibility of, hey, maybe if we do this, then this is possible. And for me, that getting paid well to work on most important issues of our time, there are lots of people who want that. There are lots of people who are acutely aware of the system, the challenges the world faces, and they've got good skills and they can earn good money, but most of that money is doing things which is meaningless, which doesn't contribute to the solutions and often contributes to the problems. And that I found there was no shortage of people given an opportunity who would jump at even just the chance of applying their skills towards worthwhile causes if they could get paid well to do it and make their life work. So I found that that narrative was enough to get lots of people's attention and interest. I think then it becomes a game of how do you make it not an all or nothing bet. If it is, cool, quit your job and then show up unpaid full-time on this thing, that's a really tough ask. But if you can start to say, hey, come to a meetup or come to a meeting or come to a retreat on a weekend or maybe do this one project until you start to build a financial base within the network, And so there were a lot of people who I was only able to recruit in once we had money I could spend on core services, which was like, cool, we've got some Enspiral money, I'm going to pay you to do this. And that is a way that I could get people who weren't just programmers and designers, which was like, cool, I've got a contract with XYZ, do you want to do the programming part of it? But it was basically individual deals tailored to individuals and their needs and their skills and abilities, one at a time, repeated over and over again. And for me, one of the lenses which I found really useful at that early stage was that the relationships are the most important thing in the network, and the only use of contracts or financial deals is that it lets people build relationships because you get their attention because they're being paid for it. So a contract which has one person isolated in a company somewhere, that's not a very good contract. Whereas a contract which had two people working together who'd never worked together for 3 weeks and was a really good one because they'd get to know each other, the contract would go, but the relationship would stay. So it became really a game of nurturing relationships, filtering a lot of people in. One thing I'm not sure how obvious it was, but in the early days, it was, 1 in 10 people stayed for longer than a few months. And then over the first 3 years, it's more like 1 in 20, 1 in 30 people. So there's a huge amount of people who show up and say, yeah, I'd like to get paid to work on more interesting things, but then for various reasons didn't stick. Maybe there's a way to do it with less attrition, but that was my experience.
Mutualizing costs is also super powerful. I know it's not always possible, but just thinking about the different ways we've done that in Enspiral, I've just talked about mutualizing risk, but also, we mutualized our office space and having, a lawyer in the network we could ask questions to, who we were also working to bring leads to for contracts, and same with accountants and other different skills and anything you can mutualize. I mean, I know people in America who are mutualizing housing costs and all kinds of things like that. Like, it's rough, but yeah, I mean, I got my start in cooperatives, in housing cooperatives in the US. So like that was a formative experience for me. Can massively reduce costs and increase your community potential. I think I had a really funny experience when we bought our first house in 2017, and we went to get a mortgage. Me and my partner, who were both had been working on Enspiral for a long time, and just realizing that so much of our wealth or resources was not represented by our bank account at all. It wasn't represented by money. It was we didn't actually make that much money, but we didn't have to spend money. We got travel paid for because some speaking engagement came through the network, or all this stuff, and I didn't have to spend time hustling for leads or doing sales because the networks was magnetically attracting opportunities, and people were just tapping on my shoulder, and just things like that. So I didn't even realize until somebody else outside from this default world was looking in and trying to analyze my finances, and there was no way to explain. Luckily they let us have a house, but it was just funny realizing how much was not quantifiable.
I think the thing that I'd add here is that it seems to me much easier if you're already a freelancer, or if you're making the transition from some sort of corporate 9-to-5 traditional job into freelancing. I think that for me, I was able, I guess with my skills base and my history, to be able to earn what I needed in 3 days a week, so that I could really dedicate up to 2 days a week of volunteer time to the collective. And I know that one of the things that I was also attracted to is Joshua's story around, in the early days, noticing this whole concept of 20% time, and noticing that by mutualizing 20% time, that could actually be the lever to create something both more magnetic and more sustainable.
Susan, do you want to maybe use that as a lead-in to talking about your chapter?
I'm not sure how interesting my chapter is, and
I enjoyed it.
I know you did, but I know that there's a lot of interest in the finances, the coffee, beer, pizza, and I'm also noticing that we only have 7 minutes left. So I'd just like to open the floor again to anybody to ask some burning questions.
I wanted to throw out that I'd be willing to talk some about the Volt co-op as far as starting from scratch. And we've gone for a little bit, so I can pause that for now. But if we have open questions, good. And then otherwise, if people are free, I'm willing to talk a little bit about that, starting from scratch. A lot of it's the freelance side. So does anyone want to jump into a specific area they have questions for? Can someone speak to the, I guess, the coffee, beer, pizza side from the authors we have here?
Want to give that a shot, Joshua?
I would say that coffee, beer, pizza was something that happened in the last 2 years, which was all about how do we get financial sustainability for the core collective. Because Enspiral itself doesn't have a business model. It has random people giving amounts of time or money to it haphazardly, or it had that, and that all of the financial activity was in the businesses in Enspiral, not in Enspiral itself. So there was also, we've been going for what, 6-7 years, and as Alana said, there's this huge amount of value which you get when you don't try and quantify things. When you just sort of realize that it's the blurry edges where numbers don't really work that well, that there's this huge wealth and richness. And so just by showing up and giving time, and you can notice, oh, cool, I'm getting lots of sales opportunity, leads, and I don't have to sell as much. Or I get a lot of professional growth and I develop my skills really quickly. That stuff becomes quite apparent in hindsight, whereas we didn't really know that's how. We had some idea about the sales stuff. I had no idea people would grow as quickly as they did in Enspiral when we started. And so what this was essentially us saying, hey, everyone, it will be much easier for us to manage the business or the Enspiral itself if we had a sustainable financial base. And hey, if you want to, can you give a coffee a week, a beer a week, or a pizza a week? I think it was like $5, $10, $20. Or you can give a random amount more, or you can ask for a scholarship if you can't pay anything. And that was essentially the model. So it was super simple and easy in hindsight, and now it's just part of how it works, and it's taken a lot of the stress out of the sort of core organizing pieces. But it took us a while to get there. And if we had started at the beginning with that sort of subscription model, would it have worked? I don't know. But it's definitely working for us now and is a key part of helping folks sleep easy at night.
Yeah, in hindsight, it'd be interesting to try it. Saying that, though, one of the things I've seen again and again recently is what you're doing now, or what you've been doing to get here, is not what you need now to move forward. So it's possible that this is what you need going forward and not to get started.
Yeah, I agree completely. And a lot of my interest right now is on who are the people who want to get started from scratch somewhere, and how can we share our journey and lessons and see if they can take some shortcuts or not have to make the same mistakes. And also, likewise, who are people who are established and what are their challenges and how can we sort of support them? What I'd say, what the opportunity which most excites me is that if we can get a network of these kinds of cooperatives around the world helping each other and sharing big deals or product opportunities or whatever it is, maybe we can actually widen the solidarity network. And there's lots of people working on that already, and it's just showing up and doing our bit is a lot of the impulse behind this book and these calls and that kind of thing. So really an open door if anyone ever wants to talk and have a small problem, a big problem, and just jam on things. I'm really happy to engage.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to this like scaling question, which we wrestled with in so many different ways over the years at Enspiral, and we're like, oh, should we be like launching Enspirals in different countries, or should we be continuing? Is there a limit to how far we should grow this Enspiral over here that we've got based in New Zealand? And I don't know, I feel like we tried lots of things and just ended up never resolving necessarily. And then now I feel like very excited about the concept of well, if we can have a network of 200 people, like we figured out kind of how to do that. And I think, yeah, Ants Cabral saying that while the UN is 40,000 people and they have this impact, that's 200 collectives of 200. So if we want to have that kind of impact on the world, the same level of impact that the UN has, then we got to do, like, somehow that feels achievable, 200 collectives of 200. And to me, even more so, because they're not all going to be the same. Each one is going to be different. And that's why I don't think anywhere in the book it's implied that you can just sort of, just copy paste this into your community and it will work, because it probably won't. Like, the things that work in Enspiral only work because they sort of grew organically, and like we went through certain failures before we did that thing or whatever. Or it's uniquely adapted to the specific environment that that's in. So yeah, sure, try some things in an experiment, but know that every community has to evolve in its own unique way.
That's great. And you bring up the UN, and I love that as an aspiration, 200 of 200. That's great. And I want us to be a part. I'm going to put that out for all of y'all. And I think the UN would be exactly what you're saying. You're creating a bunch of shared values as close as you can get, and then they're all going to be implemented within the different countries that are part of the UN. And that's how it is. I mean, we can all say we want something to be implemented a certain way because you're opinionated and we think it's best. But in the end, we go, you have your autonomy. As much as possible, right? So you meet these standards and we're part of it. So that's a great model. Does anyone else have any comments or anything to say on the last few chapters here?
Yeah, this is Watson. As far as I heard a couple things here. So there's the network of networks, kind of at the Enspiral level, where it sounds, I've heard repeated, that there's more creativity involved. There are blurry edges involved where it's hard to quantify, but the value is there outside of, let's say, even monetary. So trying to incentivize that side is difficult or maybe ill-advised. And so let's say the coffee, beer, pizza, since it's talking about at kind of the meta level, the Enspiral level, and not on the individual, like the different engagements, like the services companies that within Enspiral, the ventures, then you're trying to get the value that's outside of, like, say, monetary. And so that's where the coffee, beer, pizza, it's kind of a minimum, I don't know, maybe even a goodwill type thing that can support these different core costs. And then also to bring in where you can't just throw these rules into any organization or any community. You need to organically grow it. The chapters kind of says how you guys organically grew what it is that you thought the core costs were, and then saying, okay, you're going to basically volunteer how much money you want to give. And then that's kind of where this comes from. So one thing that is brought up to me often when we talk about, say, cooperatives, worker-owned, democratically, someone's voting on how much money they're going to get paid, that type of thing. People are skeptical. And where with this chapter, and then some of the ways that you guys were communicating it, it's more on the Enspiral level, on the network of network levels. And correct me if I'm wrong, because there's maybe more creativity involved, more of the blurry edges involved. It's too hard to incentivize, maybe ill-advised to incentivize those types of things, because you can kind of maybe get less performance if you do that. That works there. But would you guys say that you could do coffee, beer, pizza on your venture level?
I'd say that most of the ventures don't need to, because they're essentially a trading entity. They have money that comes from customers and they've got costs and whatnot. Whereas The coffee beer pizza model is basically voluntary taxation. So there are people who pay some of their income to the core. And so I haven't seen, one of our ventures, for example, is Action Station, which is a big community sort of initiative. They do kind of that, which is a donor-based model. But most of the ventures are more a trading enterprise, so they don't need to do a donor model.
And I don't think I think if Enspiral had jumped straight to its current model at the beginning, I'm not sure it would have worked. Like, we got there through so many experiments, funding the foundation or funding the core and the in-between stuff, percentage of revenue from ventures, people giving individual contributions. We got several philanthropic grants. We had, co-budgeting funds coming from many different sources, government contracts where this, X amount was going to the foundation. I mean, the book itself, if it gets successful past a certain point, will be funding the foundation. So, to be honest, those experiments were sometimes very hard, or painful lessons were learned on the way there. Sometimes I still think about, if only I'd known this, that, or the other, I would have done that differently. But I'm not sure there was a way to shortcut it. And I'm pretty sure it's very dynamic based on who you've got there, what your resource mix is, what your value sort of offering to people is. Yeah. So I think if you're thinking about this, if you're trying to resource these sorts of in-between or umbrella or something for your community, I would just encourage you to experiment, and also to be willing. I think at times, because I'm a implementer, so sometimes I hold on to things too long and really try to make them work, even when they're not. So I'd say really strike that balance and holding on to it long enough to truly understand what's going on and if it works or not, and then letting it go when it's time to let it go.
Right. Thanks for the opportunity, everybody. We all kind of need to go because it's still in the middle of our workday. I guess just echoing Joshua's invitation, if you need anything, want to, use our brains for anything, please just reach out. Any last minute things we can do to help?
I just posted something in chat really quick about getting started. Especially in the U.S., I recommend getting connected with the local cooperative associations. We're a member in the Austin Business Cooperative Association. There's several there's housing co-ops, all sorts. There's also technology co-ops. And that's a good way to kind of get connected on that side. And then I definitely want to echo, if you're trying to get started, if you can find something that you can provide a service that would be similar to if you're freelancing, or if you think as Joshua was saying earlier, building up your traditional startup and the structure to make that viable, that's a good place to start. And then the other side is thinking, how are you? The worker owner side is essentially saying, we're going to make sure that the capital and direction and stuff is controlled. I don't see that part as the problem, more as sustainability for finances. So services that you can bring in money is going to be the best. If it's something that's doesn't traditionally work that well, then talking with some of the associations, you're going to end up talking to housing co-ops and other stuff, and they have to build a lot of structure because they have to go in and get government grants and other things like that. And the stuff that they've gone through is a good place to learn whatever your domain is. That's a short of what I was going to say.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for what you do.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take it easy.
Have a good one.